Albany City Council meeting of October 16, 2017. Please join Vice Mayor Pilch in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
May we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Burns.
Here.
Councilmember Moss.
Present.
Councilmember Nason.
Here.
Vice Mayor Pilch.
Here.
Mayor McQuaid.
Present. During the past year, Albany, like the rest of the country, has experienced an increase in documented hate incidents. Incidents like this make us wonder what type of community we really are. Are we a community of people intent on hurting others? Are we a community of people who, by their privilege, are unable or unwilling to understand how others are excluded? Are we a community of people fueled by hate and rage? I don't think so. I believe we're a community of people who see evil and choose to stand up and say, not in my community. Hatred will not be tolerated here. We realize that we don't have all the answers, but are willing to talk, listen, read, study, and teach each other to better understand each other. We are willing to work hard to create the type of community we want, one that welcomes everyone. Both the City of Albany and the Albany Police Department take reports of these incidents very seriously. There is a page in the City Council section of the city website dedicated to community diversity and inclusion. Included on this page are links to the police department's statement concerning hate crimes and immigration violations and related policies. The Albany Police Department posts public bulletins on the city website. This information comes directly from the police department and gives a brief synopsis of crimes that occur within Albany. This is an evolving process through which the police department will attempt to get information out to the public as quickly as possible. Please understand there are constraints to the amount and type of information that will be posted during an active investigation. These bulletins can also be accessed from the news bulletin on the homepage of the city website. And you can see on the screen here, this is from the police department page, the public bulletin section. A more comprehensive yet detailed way to view crime in Albany is through crimereports.com. This map of Albany shows where and when crimes are committed. The goal of an inclusive and welcoming community is not achieved easily or quickly. It is not achieved by one person working alone. However, by standing together against hate and supporting our neighbors, we take a step forward. When we show our children these are our values and our beliefs, we take a step forward. When we pledge to continue the quest for a just society, we take a step forward. And this is the kind of community I think we truly are. On behalf of the City of Albany, I want to express our sympathy to the people of the North Bay who are suffering so much as a result of the fires. We are proud of our police and fire departments who have been deployed to assist in whatever way they can, including on the fire lines, and we hope for their quick and safe return. We'll be adjourning tonight's meeting in memory of those who have lost their lives in this tragic event. And you can see on the screen there's a picture of Officer Manny Torres from the Albany Police Department putting out a spot fire and our wildland truck up at one of the fire lines. Okay, item 3-2, audiovisual apprentice program recognition. Brennan, can you come on up?
Hello, and thank you, Mayor McQuaid, City Council, and City staff. My name is Brennan Brown from the Recreation and Community Services Department. I'd like to recognize our audiovisual apprentice program that took place between May through September. September is Recreation's busiest time, with music in the park every Wednesday, as well as Albany Local Week, where this year we put on events like Food Truck Friday, Pizza Pints and Pino's Party, and As You Wish Block Movie Night. As these community events continue to grow and evolve every year, the help we need must be greater and more dynamic than the year before to make the events the success that they are. This is our 4th year having the AV Apprentice program, and I cannot say enough good things about this group that had to learn a lot in a very short amount of time. What we look for in each apprentice is a passion for the work, leadership qualities, great communication skills, a driven attitude, and commitment to the events we do. Nico, Aiden, Jack, and Kai all exemplify these skills and shined with whatever tasks we threw at them. To go through the process of setting up and breaking down a concert every week on a school night is incredible. Plus, they all entered freshman year of high school, so as if the work transition wasn't big enough. They always went the extra square mile with confidence and had fun in the process. The work they did was not the most glamorous, but what we hope they got from this is real work experience in a time crunch, a big thanks from the city, a cool job to put on their resume, and a real sense of their community. I'd like to invite the 4 AV apprentices up here to accept their certificates.
I'd like to say thank you so much, and to also point out that Brennan started out as in our AV department part-time and working with KALB and CMAC and our Film Fest and so forth and so on with his expertise and what he does. And we were recently able to hire him on full-time in the Recreation Department. So welcome aboard full-time, Brennan.
Thank you to all of you. We wouldn't have had such a great summer in September without you, and we truly wouldn't have. Okay, report on action taken in closed session. There was none this evening. So that brings us to the consent calendar. Consent calendar items are considered to be routine by the City Council and will be enacted by one motion. By approval of the consent calendar, the staff recommendations will be adopted unless otherwise modified by the City Council. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a council member or member of the audience requests removal of the items from the consent calendar. Does any council member wish to pull an item?
511.
Any others? Any member of the public wish to pull an item? Okay, Vice Mayor Pilch.
I just did not want it to go perhaps unnoticed by the public that Albany, that the mayor is recommending purchasing the Albany Stands United Against Hate posters so that Albany can join Berkeley and Oakland and perhaps other cities who've purchased these posters for display in their city.
Thank you. I'll accept a motion to approve.
I move to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
Pull the council, please.
Councilmember Barnes?
Yes.
Councilmember Moss?
Yes.
Councilmember Nason?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Pilch?
Yes.
Mayor McQuay?
Yes, and the motion carries. Good of the city is a time for persons desiring to address the City Council on an item not on the agenda. Please note that city policy limits each speaker to 3 minutes. The Brown Act limits the council's ability to take and/or discuss items that are not on the agenda. Therefore, such items are normally referred to staff for comment or to a future agenda. So if you've turned in a speaker card to speak at an item not on the agenda, please come on up.
All right, looks like I got the room all to myself tonight. I'm Brian Beal. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the city's priorities right now because there's a lot of things going on, and I hate to see like people fighting about what's the most important thing, but one thing I kind of see happening coming out of Washington is kind of a two-pronged attack on the environment and healthcare, which is a pretty dangerous combination. So you destroy the environment, that makes us sick, and then you take away our hospitals, our healthcare. So those are the two important things. There's one specific item, a lot of discussion in town that I'm not personally affected by so much, but Pacific Steel Casting Company in West Berkeley has been causing problems for West Berkeley for a long time. I know the City Council is aware of this. But I just wanted to come here and raise the public's attention to it, that if you smell a metallic, acidy kind of smell in the air, that's probably, and if the wind is coming from the southwest, that's probably Pacific Steel, and the Air Quality Management District is tracking this. Other than that, just wanted to say, continue to do a great job, and I'll see you at the next topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else for good of the city? Seeing no one, we'll move on to council member reports on meetings attended, announcements of future meetings. Do you want to start?
Sure. The mayor and I both attended the mayor's conference in Newark this past Wednesday, I believe, where we saw a presentation by the East Bay Regional Park District on the economic value of the parks. It's a nice presentation. Wild venue. The pizza place, I forget what it's called. Anyway, moving on. I also attended the ACTC Bicycle and Pedestrian Advocacy Committee, Bicycle and Pedestrian Access Committee, I believe it is. It's a committee of the ACTC where they were discussing the potential alignment of the bike and pedestrian bridge that is going to be built at Gilman so that Gilman can accommodate all modes. Not only will they be redoing that intersection with the roundabouts, but they'll be putting a bridge. And there's a number of alignments suggested, including one that could border Albany. So I've asked the ACTC actually to do a presentation at the Albany City Council so that we can weigh in on that alignment. And I believe that's all I have.
Thank you. Rochelle?
Okay. I have prepared a summary of the meeting of the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission meeting of October 5th, 2017, and that's in your packets. Probably the key item there to be aware of is that first of all, the plan was approved, the plan that is significantly improved from what we saw originally before we had our special meeting. It didn't give us everything that we had hoped for, but it certainly met us at least halfway, and that was really good to see. The other piece of that I thought might be of interest is that there was discussion of the right-of-way for the Bay Trail being a relocatable alignment, that the alignment could be changed. And apparently that's something that Golden Gate Fields was seeking as part of its assurance of not being restricted in future development plans. So the relocatability is an interesting aspect, and one of the things that we commented on was that if the right-of-way is relocatable, then perhaps the parking is relocatable as well, and that the parking, as we had originally aspired to, could all of the general public parking could be moved into the right-of-way and not be right behind the beach, and we'd have a lot more restoration opportunities. But if you're interested, that's all on the website now, too. A couple of other things. You see up there the Save Alta Bates Hospital. Mayor McQuaid and I attended a meeting of the subcommittee on community information and forum planning for the the Save Alta Bates Hospital effort. And I want to encourage everyone, and we're working to get the word out, to consider coming on November 5th, which is a Sunday, to a rally. This will be a stroller brigade, and people are encouraged to bring strollers and babies, if there are babies for the strollers, but that's not necessary. And come even if you have neither a baby nor a stroller, to come and talk about community concern about the closure of our community hospital. Another event I wanted to mention was on October 8th, the Albany Landfill Dog Owners Group and Friends, in partnership with the East Bay Regional Park District and with a grant from the Alameda County-wide Clean Water Program, did a wonderful pilot project to sift sand at the beach, and ended up removing 2,440 pounds of plastics, microplastics, and other debris. And this is the really tiny stuff that you see when you're on the beach, all these little bits of plastic that accumulate there. They have a group called Sea Turtles Forever has come up with a technique for addressing that. This is important for the city of Albany, too, because it's part of our clean water obligation. We designated the Albany Beach as an area that we would pay special attention to in terms of clean water. So maybe for a future agenda, we should do something to honor this really extraordinary effort. 115 volunteers were out there with, I lift my arms because it's this kind of screen that you use to go back and forth and sift the sand. It's a wonderful thing. And that's it for me.
Thank you.
Okay, last week I was able to attend two meetings, the Program and Projects Committee meeting for the County Transportation Commission. The main topic of interest for Albany might be the direct local distributions of the B, BB, and vehicle registration fee funds. Apparently some communities are holding on to their money a bit too long, and the county is now making noises about trying to speed up the process of communities actually spending the money they get out of these funds. The issue is the same for a lot of other things, that small communities often get a certain amount of money. It's not enough to do anything, so we hoard for a while, and that kind of throws the funding process off for the region if we do too much of it. The other was an update on the green trail that's going, it's probably the biggest bicycle trail going from this downtown Oakland to the Hayward BART that the county has ever taken on, along the BART tracks and rail tracks, and just the many complications of getting that project through. On Thursday, I attended the recycling board. Perhaps the main thing on that agenda was they are now joining the Alameda County Operational Area Emergency Management Organization, which I think most communities are in. This is everybody planning for the next big one, be it an earthquake, fire, whatever the catastrophe is, how we're all going to coordinate. And the Waste Management Board will be the one that figures out where the trash goes from the fire or the earthquake or whatever. I think that the thing of note for all of us is that if you have plans for that kind of thing, it greatly enables you to get FEMA money afterwards. And I think they're finding this out up in Napa and Sonoma counties, the counties that had a plan as to what to do with a fire and how to deal with it are going to get reimbursements from FEMA. If you don't have that plan, you're not likely to get much of anything out of the government. So that's it for me.
Okay. Okay, I think with several of us, we went to the pancake breakfast on Saturday. We did coffee with the cops. Nick and I were at Albany Middle School for Walk and Roll to School Day. Several of us were at the Chamber Mixer, and I participated, or at least listened, to the Climate Mayor's conference call. And is there a city manager report?
Yes, I wanted to give everyone an update on two things. First, on Pier Street Park. We are waiting for PG&E to install a meter in the bathroom before we can open the park. We are fearful that due to the resources being deployed up to North County that we're might have, what we thought had come out of engineering and was ready to give us a date for the installation of that meter has now been postponed further. So we are working with staff on how we might go ahead and get the park opened without giving up that PG&E will help us out, but that's been one of the problems in delaying the opening of the park. Secondly, neighbors around Albany High School and Memorial Park may have gotten notices about canceled street sweeping. We were in a year-to-year contract with UBS for our street sweeping services, and they discontinued the services. We were able to get a temporary service provider, Blue Zone, into to work with us temporarily while we developed an RFP, sent it out. Those bids are going to be opened on November 7th. If everything goes well, we hope to have a permanent provider, and we can present that contract to council for approval on November 20th. The problem with the temporary provider is they are having difficulty due to traffic delays on Friday afternoons getting to us, and those Friday afternoon pickups on those streets are what's being temporarily discontinued, but we have the public works staff out there spending extra time and attention cleaning out the basins and making sure that the streets are as best we can make them until we get that permanent solution in place.
Thank you. Okay. Next item is presentation, update on Alameda County Measure A1 funding. May we have a staff report, please?
Yes, thank you, Mayor and council members. The purpose of this is to give you an update on the Alameda County Measure A1, which is a $580 million general obligation bond, which was approved by the voters in November of 2016. These funds are to be allocated both to cities through what's called a base allocation and into regional pools to be used for development of new affordable housing in the county. The council discussed this at your July 31st meeting, and you provided us comments to continue to evaluate the feasibility of the city-owned parcel at the corner of Washington and Cleveland for potential affordable housing, as well as to continue discussions with Bridge Housing and the Berkeley Food and Housing Project for providing financial assistance to their project in downtown Berkeley, which would be able to be served by people in Albany, would be available to people in Albany who need homeless services. At the time of the July 31st presentation, we expected things to go a little bit more quickly than as it turns out they have. Since the July 31st discussion, the Board of Supervisors have held several meetings related to implementation requirements for the Measure A1. In your packet are several staff reports and PowerPoint presentations. In addition, today we received information that there is a meeting tomorrow with the Board of Supervisors at 1 o'clock in their chambers in Oakland, which will be discussing reviewing the proposed implementation policies and also be considering action on 4 projects in the county that are ready to have a financial commitment made right away. With respect to the situation here in Albany, we are looking forward to further discussions with Bridge and Berkeley Food and Housing Project, as I mentioned. We've learned that there is schedule refinements, I guess you'd say, to their project, and the urgency that we had this summer is going to slip a little bit, and so while we will continue to work with them, we don't need to take action at this time for their project. And a representative of Bridge is here this evening if you have any questions for them about the details of that. With respect to the next steps on the Cleveland, Washington property, I'd like to use a kind of an excerpt from the presentation that the Alameda County staff gave to the Board of Supervisors. And it's in your packet. It was a PowerPoint presentation called Affordable Housing 101. It's quite extensive. I won't go all the way through it, but I'm going to use a couple of those slides just to give you an overview of what we're working on at the staff level. First, this slide just kind of summarizes the key early steps in the development of subsidized housing for people who need the financial assistance. We obviously own the land, but there's some entitlement work to be done. First, the land that we own is designated for housing in our general plan, but because it was former Caltrans property, it never got a zoning designation. So we need to go through the procedural steps of zoning the property to match the general plan designation. In addition, right now, there is one parcel of land that we purchased from Caltrans. Part of it is Pure Street Park, as you know. And so that park portion needs to be subdivided, and this remaining parcel, a standalone parcel that could be used for potential affordable housing. As part of the planning at this stage, establishing the property lines, we need to revisit the alignment of a proposed bikeway that runs basically from Pierce Street. If you're riding south from Pierce Street, it would be a bikeway that will allow you to transition onto Cleveland. Some of our active transportation planning documents have that alignment, and we need to finalize that alignment in order to properly subdivide the property. The second step, the third bullet point that we need to go through is to evaluate the environmental considerations. It's both the California Environmental Quality Act and just the on-the-ground reality of that particular parcel. Of particular concern is the air quality and noise implications of the freeway and the railroad. There are solutions to those situations, but we need to get our arms around the scope of the problem and make sure that if we were to create housing there, that it's safe and healthy for the people who are living in it.
Jeff, can I ask you a question right there? Why wouldn't that just be part of CEQA? Why is that pulled out separately?
Some types of affordable housing projects may not need to go through a full CEQA review.
Okay, thank you.
So I think that's part of what we need to do in our due diligence is to figure out exactly what the CEQA review process would be. And then once the basic the parcel is created, we know the basic framework of the planning process, we then would work with an affordable housing development partner to actually go through the formal approval process of a design. That would be the conformity to local requirements and the final bullet point, public approval support process. I should note that the public review process, I think, really begins at the beginning. Then just using somebody else's slide. I think early on when we're talking about the zoning and the subdivision, that's where a lot of our public engagement process needs to be focused. The final step is to really think strategically about the community of people that we want to serve if we were to do a project there. And that plays into strategically how the project would be financed. Some projects, it would be providing financial assistance for the operating costs of the project. Others, it would be providing financial assistance to the cost of building the project, or probably, in reality, both. And that, again, it's a combination of who we want to serve and the resources that would be available to us. So some other outside funding sources may be more flexible than others. They may be targeting particular populations and income levels. The presentation that was provided, again, I encourage everyone to take a look at that because there's a lot of interesting information in it. But I think there are two slides here that I'd like to highlight just to make sure that people understand the financial commitment that's associated with the project. This is prepared for, I think, kind of a compilation of an average project in the county. And the middle line there, the bolded line, basically is the punch line, which is for projects that use 9% tax credits, which is one of the major sources of financial assistance to affordable housing projects. They still require $150,000 worth of funding per unit. Now, Measure A1 can go towards much of that, but not all of it. And as you'll see in the bullet points in the bottom of the screen, there are a number of other sources that you kind of cobble together. Maybe not big chunks of money, relatively big chunks of money, but still a lot of work.
Jeff, I'm sorry, that 148 figure is a one-time upfront amount of money, or is that an annual fee?
That's a one-time to build the project. The 9% types of projects are more competitive. This site is not a particularly competitive project site because it's not located on a major transit line, among other things. So there is another source of tax credits. It's 4% tax credits. Again, and the requirement is higher in this case. 209,000 of local funds would be required or not just local, state and local funds, in addition to the tax credit funding. So the point that I wanted to make by showing these two slides is there's still a lot of money that goes into these projects, and there's still some decisions that would need to be made strategically about the community that we want to serve if we were going to go this way. And overall, working through all these steps, that's several years worth of work under the best of circumstances, both with the land use planning part of it and the working with a potential development partner.
Who would do all this work? Does the staff have enough bandwidth to actually do this, or would you be feeling compelled to hire somebody to actually?
I'm looking at the city manager.
We would be compelled for the latter, yes.
Okay.
Existing staff can do some of the preliminary planning stuff where that's kind of in our strike zone of what we can deal with. But when we get to the more strategic issues or the more technical issues, we're going to need some help. So that concludes my presentation. Be happy to answer any questions.
Sure. So the governor just passed, or the legislature passed, and the governor signed into law a bunch of housing bills, including some bills I understand to streamline the process for building affordable housing. What's your understanding of, kind of some of the high points of those, of that legislation? Does some of it include a possible exemption from CEQA requirements or other? What are the high points?
I'm sorry, I haven't familiarized myself with that legislation. I'm planning to attend a meeting next Friday, so I was setting those summaries aside until then. Just kind of by glancing at the topic sentences, I believe they are CEQA reform. I don't think CEQA is going to be the issue here as much as just kind of grinding through some of our own issues locally about what's desirable to have at this site and doing the basic land use zoning types of things. CEQA can go in tandem. I think the key to this is making sure there's a community consensus about what we want to do there. That's where you can lose a lot of time in a process.
Have we had any of our local affordable housing developers look at this parcel and tell us whether they would have an interest in trying to develop it?
Yes, I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that. We are reaching out to a member of the community who recently was on the Planning and Zoning Commission, Susan Friedland, who is Executive Director of Satellite Affordable Housing. She's offered to give us some help with this. So we're exchanging documents, but no conclusions to share with you yet.
Okay, I ask because I was a latecomer to the Pierce Street Park process, but when it was going through, I asked about, well, have people thought about whether any of this land should be considered for housing? And the response was, we did look into that. We had people take a look at it from the affordable housing development community, and they concluded it was not suitable. And this is part of that land. So I'm curious to get some feedback. If we don't have a developer interested, it's really not going to make much sense to dive into a work-intensive process to make it available for development that isn't going to happen.
I agree with you, and we will do that. It certainly is a challenging site. A more conventional affordable housing site would be on a street like San Pablo with a larger parcel where 100, 200 units can be constructed. It's much more efficient construction. It's much more efficient management. And a smaller site might be more suitable for special populations where it's a smaller group of people that are living together. That's what we need to brainstorm a little bit more.
A couple questions and thoughts rambling around up there. You mentioned the lack of immediate transit as being an impediment for getting funding. How close does a transit line have to be? There is a bus line on Pierce Street. I believe. But that doesn't qualify as one that
I
would,
don't believe so. I think the terminology used is major transit line, and I'm not sure what the volume of transit service, but it's intended to be put housing in places where people who don't have cars have lots of options to get where they need to go for their jobs or for their shopping or whatever.
so you were saying this is a relatively small lot by the normal standards, although by Albany standards, it's not so small, actually. Could there be some other idea of using that, trading that land for something larger or more, that would be better suited for a housing development on, say, San Pablo or Solano?
That is certainly a possibility if something doesn't happen in the affordable housing realm. It's an asset that the city owns, and you can explore the whole wide range of things you might want to do with it, whether it's for housing or other things. I'm sure there will be people who would like to see the park expand. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. As I mentioned, the bikeway is something that would also come through there, and who knows, there may be other things that come out of a community engagement process that we haven't really thought about.
Okay.
Any comments?
We did a CEQA analysis for the park about air quality already. Would that be pertinent?
We would certainly go back and take a look at that. The standards are constantly evolving. The Bay Area Air Quality Management District is going to be coming out with some new guidelines shortly, and probably more stringent. I haven't seen them yet. And also the exposure assumptions are different with a residential use than it would be with what's essentially a passive park, which we have today.
I know this has been a big issue in LA recently because they're trying to do housing on freeway corridors, and there's big debates about whether you can really get the air clean enough or not with filters and whatnot.
It's an environmental justice issue too, of where to put affordable housing. Yeah.
What about those people who already live on Calhoun? What do we?
Right. Many of those properties probably would benefit from, more sophisticated filtration systems and windows and so on and so forth. No question about it.
Do we have a ballpark figure about how many units we could conceivably put down there?
Yeah, not yet. Not yet.
Less than 20?
Not yet. I hesitate to speculate about that because
It's less than 1,000.
it's less than 1,000. Yeah, I don't have to speculate about that.
More than one.
All right, final question. There was an alternative mentioned about giving the money to Berkeley for some sort of housing project there. Can you briefly explain what the alternatives are?
The Berkeley Food and Housing Project, along with Bridge Housing, has a proposal for a large project in downtown Berkeley that would, among other things, be available to clients of Berkeley Food and Housing, and they provide services here in Albany, so that if someone needed to go into, and there are different phases of the program, and again, Jamie is here, can talk to the details of that. I don't recall the specific numbers, but there's everything from shelter beds to transitional housing to permanent affordable housing. And that would be something that part of what would be a discussion with them is if the city of Albany were to provide some of our allocation of county funds, we would want to make sure the city of Albany community benefits from it.
And what about looking north? There's a lot of development, apartment development going on in El Cerrito along the San Pablo corridor now. Have we thought about that?
That's a different county, so I think we'd probably run into issues with Alameda County on expenditure of the funds outside of the county.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. I know it's really soon, but has there been any kind of thought about the impacts of all the building now that's going to have to happen in the North Bay, as far as just the price of materials, the price of labor, the availability of both of those things? Is that just going to elevate the cost for all building? Is that kind of your gut feeling?
I'm sure it will. The rebuilding process tends to take quite a while, sadly, for that community. It's going to be 5 or 10 years for those neighborhoods to really fill in again. But yes, there will be increased demand for materials, supplies, labor, so on and so forth.
So when you talk about 209,000 per unit, say in 4 years when we're ready to build, it'll probably be not only with inflation, but just with that piece, it'll probably be even more. Is that your best guess?
I'm sure there's been some research on that. I don't know what it is, but we could go back and look at the trends after the Oakland fire is probably the best local example to see what the implications were on the construction market after that fire.
So it appears if we were to move much farther forward, that we would need to hire a consultant. Is that sort of right, if from where we are now to talking real numbers and real projects?
I think we need a few months. We're approaching the holidays, so I don't want to make any promises before the holidays, but I think we can come back early next year with answers to kind of the general questions like maybe how many units and maybe what would this start to look like, and some sense of its financial feasibility. I think it would make sense to be able to give you those answers at the same time we come back and talk about the Berkeley project as well. I think you naturally want to have those side by side before you make any decisions.
Is there a way to integrate other properties? You mentioned a very outlandish maybe possibility of a trade, or what else we might be able to do on San Pablo. Could that be part of the report that we get? I guess what I'm asking is, how much information can we get without having to hire a consultant?
I think you'll get better information if we can bring on somebody who has the time and the expertise to give you solid answers. And that may not be a lot of money. That might just be a few weeks worth of time for someone to look at this who has experience, direct experience that we don't. I don't know of any other parcels on San Pablo Avenue that are right now in active development. So it would be kind of speculation about whether something else would be available within the time frame of Measure A1.
Okay.
I have another question. I've been reading articles about homeless university students in Berkeley, and it occurred to me, Albany for many decades provided its affordable housing through its hosting of the University Village. A large percentage of our land, a lot of our students' families did not pay bond issues and things like that because they were part of the university. And if we're talking about shovel-ready projects, I understand that when the University Village was rebuilt, there were planned units that were never built, and that those planned units would have been the most affordable of the units available at the village. If the university were to go forward with those more affordable units for homeless students or other very low-income members of the university community, and that were in Albany, it seems like that might bring together our concerns about homelessness, about this being in Albany, and a number of other things. Can we look into whether there is a plan for that sort of housing and whether that might be an alternative to the bridge project if we are firm that we want to spend that money in Albany, but we, for whatever reason, were not able to develop that corner of the Pure Street Park parcel for housing?
I'd be happy to reach out to the people at UC Berkeley, the housing staff there. I do know they've been doing some very high-level kind of strategic planning about the future of housing on campus. They identified a handful of potential sites, including a portion of UC Village that's underutilized, where the kind of old metal warehouses are. I don't believe it's a high priority. I haven't gotten the impression that it's a high priority site for them. They're looking at other things first, but we can start those conversations and report back to you.
And if it comes to having to find a home for that funding, if we're not able to spend it ourselves, and that's shovel-ready housing, there might be some opportunity for a mutually beneficial kind of arrangement there.
Jeff, one more quick question. I guess I'm a little puzzled, given how much work we put into the housing element, that it doesn't sound like it would be of much use here. Maybe I'm wrong. But more to the point is, let's say we move forward with plans to develop what is not an ideal site down there. I mean, I remember years ago we talked about putting our public works center there, and there was all sorts of problems with even putting a public works center there. So what happens if we get deep into the planning process for a less than ideal site, when suddenly, by some stroke of good fortune, one of those many places that we've identified on the San Pablo corridor and the housing element suddenly becomes available? I guess my question is, can we shift gears, one, and what kind of time frame are we looking at ultimately? What if, can we sit on this money for how long? 4 years, 6 years? Hoping, maybe wistfully hoping, that something is going to open up that was identified in the housing element.
The revised implementation policies call for a commitment for the city's base allocation by 2021. I forget the exact date in that month, but it's essentially 4 years off. So there's not a lot of sitting on it, and that's a commitment, so that's a real project. The possibility of switching from one project to another midstream, I think, really depends on where we are in a project. If we start to work with a development partner, there are going to be a series of agreements that that they will naturally want to have this. If the city is inviting proposals, they're going to expect that we fulfill our commitment to provide financing to it. Those are contracts that all come to City Council, and we would make sure to let you know you're making a commitment, and that there would be a certain point early on where, yeah, you could switch off, and that would be unfortunate, but that's the way it goes. But at a certain point, you would be contractually obligated to stay with a project through some agreed-upon time frame.
And what happens if we just sit on our hands and do nothing? What happens to the money, and what would be sort of a drop-dead date for getting something going if something, say, on the San Pablo corridor were to become available?
Well, if the city is unable to find a project, the funds go into what they call the regional pool, which is shared with the cities of Oakland, Berkeley, Emeryville, and Albany, I believe, are the 4 cities. So it will go to its intended use of providing affordable housing in our region, and that's a good thing. But we wouldn't, and we could later on compete for those funds. But it will be tough to compete with the city of Oakland, city of Emeryville, because they have the sites that are more readily developed. And they have a number of projects in the pipeline already that could spend much of that regional pool pretty quickly.
Sort of a drop-dead date for us doing something?
You know, I think we probably have a year or so to really map out what we want to do. We can think through how to make the best use of that time, and reach out to property owners perhaps on San Pablo. I'm just kind of thinking off the top of my head, but reach out to property owners on San Pablo Avenue to let them know these funds are available, and to see if this would be the catalyst for them to come in and talk to us about something.
Any more questions? Nick?
Yeah, one more. What is the applicability of A1 programs and funding towards affordable units inside of other housing developments? Does it have to, these funds and programs have to be applied to a standalone project, or can they be applied to units within other projects?
I haven't focused on that part of it. I believe they could be used to preserve existing affordable housing, And so perhaps they could be used to acquire a piece of property and manage it as an affordable housing project. I'd have to look into the details of that.
Thank you.
Okay, how many people wish to speak tonight? Okay, oh, keep adding. Okay, come on up. Please turn in a speaker card.
Jim Beller, Alan Maris, and Brian Beal.
You do have 3 minutes, and please hold it to that or try to make it even less. And if you want to sort of reiterate what the person before you said, you can just say that. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Jim Beller. I do outreach for our wildly successful shower project, and I think I've gotten to know the people who live on the street around here pretty well. I really think we need a project within Albany, and this is kind of emotional for me. One thing I've noticed is I've seen people die out there. 2 people whose name I've known died just being without a place to live, either along San Pablo Avenue or on 2nd Street. I knew somebody else who had a kid. So as much as I feel for homeless students from UC, I would hate to see money go back to UC for their problems. And one thing I thought of, a sort of boutique project we could think of, would be a hospice for people who are living on the street, because many of them would need something like that. And it could be done within the space we're talking about. And it would do some people a lot of good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alan Maris, Albany resident and a member of Albany's Diverse Housing Working Group. This is pretty exciting for us, this opportunity. We've been around for a good 5 years. We had a lot more members at one time, but we're still committed to providing diverse housing, which would include definitely low income and very low income, housing for the very low income. In Albany, a little bit of background, in 2000, 2004, homeless people were removed from an unhealthy place on the Albany bulb to migrate to an unhealthy place under freeways. So they're still with us. Sierra Club and Citizens for East Shore State Park encouraged their removal from the bulb, but did not suggest an appropriate alternative. And Albany agreed to this. And at the time, there seemed to be good reasons for having those people move, but we didn't really look at where were they ever going to move? How are we going to take care of these citizens of Albany other than pushing them under the freeway? So this is an opportunity, I think, to address that issue. At a recent Love the Bulb event, a local artist and homeless advocate called Albany's actions deplorable. Albany's general plan housing element states needs for 80 to 120 low to very low income housing units. This would allow us to address our needs in our housing element that have not really been addressed in over 10 years. Albany's Project Hope, which is sponsored by you, the City Council, is beginning to address these issues for our less fortunate people in Albany. Some of the people who are moved off the bulb, I think maybe 20 to 30, have received referrals to housing in Richmond and Oakland. We have the dog shower program. We have a new community resource center. This is a good start. With Alameda County Bond Measure A1, $2.6 million funds are available for, say, an $8 to $10 million project that could house anywhere from 20 to 200 people of very low income. Several homeless and low-income single parents forced Albany rent increases could be cared for, and planning and funding partners need to be assessed. And we need support partners in the community, including the existing housing group, the affordable. Next steps, we need to really start looking at a development and funding plan. We've been sitting on our seats for almost a year, and other cities have made their moves.
Thank you.
After Mr. Beal would be Alan Kane, Mary Reese, and Francesco Papalia.
Yes, hi. So first off, I think it's really important for everyone involved with this discussion to understand what our choices are. And I'm not sure we're quite at that point, but it seems like everyone's best option would be to spend this money in Albany. If we can't spend it in Albany, then I think Berkeley Food and Housing probably becomes the next best thing because it's around here. And we are working with Berkeley on housing. And then if we don't do anything, the money goes into this general pool. And if, as Jeff suggested, we pretty much lose it. I did attend one of the presentations by Berkeley Food and Housing on the project, I think a couple months ago. And I was really impressed with how it seemed like there was maybe a lower cost per unit. So I guess my question for Jeff is if we were weighing this as two different projects, say the project in Cleveland or the Berkeley Food and Housing project, is it possible we'd be able to get more units out of our $2.5 million? Or would it be about the same? Do you have any comment?
That's the information that we would like to bring back to the council. I don't have any.
Okay.
I don't have enough information now, but that would be one of the metrics to use to compare.
Okay. And I guess the other thing that I would, again, it's not really clear what our options are, but what I would think would be the ideal use of this money is if we could use it to somehow promote our secondary units, if we could assist homeowners in building secondary units, because that it looks like what you know about Albany is there isn't a lot of available land here. The land we have is in places like Cleveland that have environmental issues. And wow, it just seems like it would be a big win for everybody, including the homeowner, if we could, just somehow increase the capacity of our existing units. That aside, I mean, I voted for this bond measure because I wanted more housing. And if it doesn't happen to be in Albany, that may be a reality we have to live with. But it's good to know we have a little bit of time before we have to make a decision. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there, Alan Kane representing the Diverse Housing Working Group. Thank you so much for volunteering your time to the community. Also want to congratulate the city on the drop-in center. It's been outstanding. I hear that Allison's doing a fantastic job, so I want to say thank you for that. And although I am part of the Solano Avenue Association, of course, I'm just representing the Diverse Housing Working Group tonight. And I wanted to say that, Peggy, the speech that you made at the beginning of the meeting was outstanding. One of the words that you used was inclusion. And I know there's a lot of talk about cultural diversity and being sanctuary cities for people of different cultures. What about being a sanctuary city for people of different economic backgrounds or social economic backgrounds? We should be a sanctuary city for everybody. We're slowly becoming a city for the rich. So it'd be great if we take a lot of that energy about being culturally diverse, and if we can also work on becoming economically diverse, that would be great as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mary Reese. I'm also part of the Diverse Housing Working Group, and I want to encourage the City of Albany to use the funds within Albany, whether it's for developing secondary units or building a totally new building or acquiring an already existing apartment building or acquiring some apartments that could be subsidized within existing apartment buildings. I think we need to do our part as part of the Bay Area as a whole to house people in greater socioeconomic diversity than we currently are doing in Albany. we do have the housing element, and I think that should be a guide and a motivation towards housing more people of various income levels within Albany. Thank you.
Thank you.
After Mr. Papalia would be Leah Burrow, Julie Wickley Lynch, and Jamie Shaw.
Good evening. I'd like to have some clarification of some of the facts of the issue. Is it $2.5 million or $2.6 million that we're talking about? Or is it another number? Does anyone? Because it's not evident in all of the information that was put out. So I find that, you know, the public needs to know. Is it, do we know what it is?
The city's base allocation is $2.59 million.
Okay, so I request that in future reference about this to the public, that number is put into the record and for public display. Because that 2.5 million actually isn't money that we have, it's money that we're going to be borrowing. And by the way, I am speaking for the Albany property rights advocates at this time. And so I want you to make sure that the public knows that the money's, if it's not spent here, it's going to be given away to Berkeley, and that we will be paying for it on our tax bill for the next 30 years. Am I correct? That the bond measures get paid off on our tax bills over time?
Francesca, why don't you ask all of your questions, and then we'll let Jeff answer all together.
Okay, well, all right, fine. So I think that's kind of, the public should know that this is just a bundle of money that is going to be distributed. It's what we're borrowing and we're going to have to pay back, and let every citizen know that we're doing that. And I would like to piggyback on top of what was said about the diversity that we cherish in our community, because the people that this housing is going to serve are the people that we want to be in our community. Isn't it kind of ironic to have a diverse, cherished principles that we ship them somewhere else to live? I want them in the community, living with them, have kids going to school with them, meeting with them, having them come to the city council meeting and giving input. That's what we need, and that's why we should be spending the money here. Now, take a different tact. I'm going to speak for myself, and it might be a bit of a surprise that I will tell you that I understand all the values of why we might want to give the money to Berkeley. And I am going to state that I am for the transfer between the city of Albany and the city of Berkeley of this money. I think it's a very good idea that the city of Berkeley give us $2.5 million so we can better serve our community. We gave them the Whole Foods Market 3 years ago. That market is developing and was a boon to the economic development of the city of Berkeley along the Gilman corridor, and they've been reaping the $200,000, $250,000 a year in taxes is being paid by Whole Foods right now. I have the tax records right here, which I'm going to...
You need to wrap it up, please.
I am wrapping up. And I'm going to pass it in so you can see what Whole Foods pays in taxes right now. And for some reason, it was transferred for $33 million, but it's only assessed for $16 million. And I hope that kind of mistake doesn't happen here in Albany with Sprouts.
Thank you.
With great anxiety, I'm here, invited by my friend Alan. There needs to be some discussion about the population you are serving. I'm that population. My name's Leah Burrell. I'm 62. I am disabled. I finished up my degree, Phi Beta Kappa honors at UC Berkeley last year, and the last year and a half of that time I was homeless. There's not enough money in their budgets to support students, so a lot of us end up on the street, and none of us can afford the village. I'm currently working with Berkeley Food and Housing. I've only been working with them a couple of weeks, and they have found me housing already. I will be moving in on the 1st. It will be rent-free. People in my position do not have money to pay rent. A lot of focus is made on the developers, the landlords, the investors, and how they're going to recoup their money. Whenever you're charging poor people money for rent, they have nothing left over to eat on or drive on or build a future. I don't know what the answer is, but we need some more creative solutions for poor people who cannot afford rent. That is why I'm homeless. I was priced out of the market, a very nice apartment in the Oakland Hills with a view of the bay. The landlord didn't want me anymore. There are a lot of issues about this. We need to have more creative uses of our land, more creative solutions about where it's put, how it's built, who lives in those units. And a lot of us don't want to live 3 or 4 in an apartment or 3 or 4 in a room. I heard something on NPR today talking about backyard units in Los Angeles. And I think that's a really good idea, except the poor person will end up paying the rich landlord a lot of money they don't have. And if those end up happening, these units, backdoor units, garage units, some kind of rent cap needs to be put on those people if they get funds from you guys to build them. Being homeless sucks. It's one of the worst things that's ever happened to me. It has devastated my life. I have plans. I want graduate school. I want to build a future for myself, and I can't build it in my van. I can't build it by paying every penny I've got towards rent. There's so many issues here, but I appreciate what you guys are trying to participate in here. This housing issue is only going to get worse as populations increase. There needs to be more creative solutions to this than the usual model that is put out there. So I'm advocating for what you're doing, but please open your minds, expand your thought processes, think outside the box, and don't take up the last Gill track land for this, please. It's what we've got left.
Thank you very much. You need to wrap up.
Yes, I'm done now. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jamie Haichu. I'm a senior project manager with Bridge Housing Corporation. Terry Light, the executive director of Berkeley Food and Housing Project, wishes she could be here tonight and sends her apologies for not being here. We very much appreciate the council and mayor and staff taking up what I would say is an unusual request to use the Albany base allocation funds on a project in Berkeley. Our initial reason for coming to the city was Berkeley Food and Housing Project's ongoing relationship with the city of Albany on their shelter facilities that they currently run. We were hoping to build and continue to hope to build on that relationship. I wanted to give you a brief update on the project and remind you of kind of some of the particulars that we discussed back in July. This is a project that was conceptualized as part of the downtown area plan that Berkeley passed several years ago. Bridge and Berkeley Food and Housing Project were selected as the developers in 2014. Since that time, we've gone through a lot of the feasibility. We're now at a point where we have submitted a formal planning application or are working through some of the items that staff highlighted earlier in their presentation. This site is in the downtown area plan, so had a blanket EIR that we will tier off of as part of the CEQA and NEPA process for our project. The project itself is located on what is currently a surface parking lot. We will develop kind of 3 different components, or 4 really, because we will be replacing some of that public parking in underground lots. On top of that, Bridge Housing Corporation will own and operate an 89-unit affordable housing development serving folks who make 50% and 60% of the area median income. On another portion of the property, Berkeley Food and Housing Project will operate a building that includes 32 shelter beds. That's actually relocating a facility that they currently run in the Veterans Building downtown Berkeley. In addition to that, there will be 12 veterans transitional housing units. So kind of longer term, it's a program, again, that Berkeley Food and Housing Project currently runs in partnership with the VA. As staff noted, our timeline has shifted slightly. We were hoping to have our entitlements wrapped up this year in order to apply to the state for cap and trade funding in January. That was an ambitious goal that unfortunately we weren't able to hit. In some ways that has put us on a timeline that is perhaps a little bit more realistic for getting through entitlements. We will be spending all of 2018 going through the many funding applications that it takes to get a project of this nature done. And then hopefully at the end of 2018, the next round of the cap and trade funds will be available. We'll go after those funds and then apply for our low-income housing tax credits. So obviously a great amount of work to be done. I very much appreciate the conversation tonight. I think this is an important decision, and a lot of the questions you were asking about the potential for developing in Albany are incredibly relevant. I look forward to continuing the conversation with you and staff. So thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Julie Wakely Lynch, here representing St. Albans Church and also a founding member of the Diverse Housing Working Group. I remember being in a study session here in this room, I guess maybe 5 years ago or so, where we were all lamenting, that we just couldn't figure out a way to come up with affordable housing in Albany. And a bunch of us said, there's a lot of resources in this room that are not being tapped. And we formed the Diverse Housing Working Group. We all became experts on what a housing element is. We held public forums at St. Albans Church multiple times. People got really involved. People worked very hard to pass the A1 bond so that there would be funding for affordable housing in Albany. And I just would like to echo the requests that we really approach this creatively. I mean, Albany is not the same as other communities in the East Bay. It's small, it's dense, but that doesn't mean that there aren't possibilities for creating viable and good affordable housing here. I think we just need to be a little bit more creative in our approach. And, we're still here. We meet every month. We talk with people from the East Bay Housing Organization often who are working with every city in the East Bay to help develop creative models of affordable housing. And I will say that on a personal note, I'm an active volunteer with Habitat for Humanity, which is doing projects with the city of Fremont and the city of Martinez. And, if you want to lower your building costs, that's a great organization to partner with. There are a lot of possibilities out there, and, there are a lot of us who are willing to be foot soldiers in gathering information and bringing in resources. So please don't forget that we're here, and we're really grateful that you're taking this topic up. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to council. Now, remember, this is a study session. We're not taking a vote.
May I make a brief comment?
Sure.
This is to follow up on, I think, something Brian Beal said, although I'm not assigning responsibility to his comments, my comments to him. But I'm thinking of a story I read in the New York Times about this topic where New York City had inclusionary affordable housing requirements on new developments in Manhattan, which is a very expensive housing market. And it turned out to be kind of ugly. Some of the developers had actually put in separate entrances for the lower income people so they wouldn't have to go through the same doorman and et cetera. And at one point, one of the developers said, if you took these inclusive affordable housing units in Manhattan and just rented them out at market rate, and took that money and subsidized units out in Queens, you could house a heck of a lot more people. So at some point, there's a trade-off that we have to consider. And I'm just posing this as a question because, we can think about this further down the road, but I don't know if we could build a 4-unit building down there on Pierce Street Park, but if we get 6 units in a building in Berkeley that has much more economies of scale, how are we going to make that trade-off? That's the question. And I'm not saying I have an answer, but that's going to be an issue.
I have a question to start with for Jeff. I just wanted to make sure that that I asked the question correctly, or that you understood the question I was asking previously, which was that can any of the Measure A1 has quite a few different programs in it, and so I think we ought to be creative and take a look at all of these and see what might be applicable in Albany. But my question was, was for the development of new housing. If a developer to come in here and build a new apartment building with some affordable units, could some of the A1 funding, could some of the programs be applied to that sort of affordable unit building?
Yes, I believe so. We could enter into an agreement with the developer that they lower the rent or provide more units than they otherwise might be required to do. Yes.
And that would I mean, but we would get A1 support for doing that?
I believe so.
Okay. All right. I think that's something to look at. So if I could just continue on, I do really appreciate the DHWG and the fact that we have it in this community. It's a fantastic thing to have an advocacy organization for this issue in the community, and I do believe we should work with you closely. I think that we need to do a number of things. We need to look at those housing bills that have been passed recently and see how they're going to change the landscape for building housing and perhaps make it easier in Albany. I think we need to consider how difficult building a standalone affordable housing project is. Susan Friedland's name was mentioned previously, and she has spoken in, I think it was a number of years, 2 years ago or maybe 4 years ago, there was a workshop she gave. I also heard her speak at the your organization, the club, the something club. Anyway, I heard her speak.
She spoke at Rotary.
Yes, Rotary. Thank you. Sorry about that. Spoke at the Rotary Club. And anyway, the gist of some of the things she said about building these affordable housing projects are that they're incredibly complex to execute. You have to get the developer in line to agree to build this, and then you saw the funding sources that have to come through that you have to apply for. As staff alluded to, it would require a tremendous amount of staff time. We'd probably have to hire more staff to do that. So I think we ought to think more creatively. We ought to think about other projects, such as just attracting housing, period, in Albany, and making it attractive enough for developers so that and putting the right incentives in place, including A1 funding, so that they'll build the affordable units along with the market rate housing. That's the sort of creativity I'd like to see. Habitat for Humanity, that would be great, but what I understand is they usually require a lot more green, a lot more open land to do their projects rather than the kind of constrained features we have here. But doesn't hurt to reach out to them and ask if they're interested in building here. We were economically diverse. Our last census, maybe it was the 2010 census, showed we were economically diverse. I fear that that has changed quite a bit in recent years. I fear that very much, and I agree that economic diversity is one of the many diversities we want to include in this city. Finally, I'll just say to anyone that I'm a member of an organization called SPUR, which I encourage everyone to join, if only for the wonderful magazine that they put out. And they're a big proponent of housing. And 2 issues recently, this one, Build More Housing, and this one about Seattle, where they talk about how Seattle gets more housing built, were very eye-opening to me about the policies that cities and states have in place to make this happen. California is finally getting its act together by passing this legislation to help more housing get built. one of the things that they point out in this article, and I'm sorry I'm going on long, but I'm going to end soon. One of the things they point out in this article is that Massachusetts has had a measure on the books since 1969 that allows affordable housing to be built in any community in the state. So the state is finally coming around. We also need to look at whatever it takes for us to adjust our local policies in Albany to make developers and other groups, to make it more affordable and more feasible for developers and interested parties to build this sort of housing. So yeah, creativity is definitely needed here.
Rochelle?
Yeah, I also want to compliment the Diverse Housing Working Group for its advocacy. I do think we need to move at this point from advocacy into recruitment. Groups like the Diverse Housing Working Group and faith groups and the city, I think, all need to partner to draw in developers who have the capacity to do the kinds of things that we want to do. The reason that we're thinking of sending the money over to the Berkeley Food and Housing Project is, first of all, they're already a wonderful partner that did absolutely amazing things that I think everyone in Albany should be very proud of in terms of doing outreach to the homeless on the bulb and helping people get into housing that they could not only stay in for an interim, but they could actually afford over the long term, helping people get incomes. Half the people out there were able to be housed, and that is really an amazing accomplishment that the Berkeley Food and Housing Program, and I think the city of Albany, both can really take pride in. But we're reaching out to them because they have the capacity. They have a project. They have something shovel-ready. The idea that the city of Albany is going to become an affordable housing developer, that we're going to develop in-house capacity to develop affordable housing, to my mind, is a complete non-starter. This is a very complex field. You have to have people who know the field, have the diversity. You need a lot of different people with different forms of expertise to come together to be an effective developer. The only way we're going to get that is through recruitment of partners. We're not going to be able to develop that in-house. So the Berkeley Food and Housing Project is a potential partner. I think the university and housing homeless students is a possibility worth looking into. But there are lots of affordable housing developers that we could reach out to, and we need to do that. And I hope that's somewhere where the Diverse Housing Working Group could jump in. I also want to say, by the way, on hospice, I did want to say, if anyone knows a person who is dying on the street, please contact Berkeley Food and Housing Project. If they're here in Albany, Albany Project Hope, we are still contracting with them. There are resources available. Hospice care is covered under Medi-Cal. Those people should be taken care of, and they should be taken care of right away. Finally, I want to say something about economic diversity and the issue of taxation. Each time we levy a tax, we make market rate housing just incrementally a little bit more expensive. And, you know, all of us in Albany, or probably the great majority, are more than willing to pay taxes and to raise taxes to do good things and do the right things. But we need to remember that each time we raise the taxes, we make our housing just that much less affordable. And what we end up with, what you see in San Francisco, is very wealthy people, people who lived in subsidized housing, and the homeless. And you just have entire demographics, young people starting out in life. You look at the homes in Albany, they're very basic. They're on very small lots, a lot of very small homes, and yet they are totally unaffordable as starting homes for young people getting going in life unless they have assistance from their parents. So we need to think about what we're doing. Just raising taxes and raising, we've got to think about the impact of that on our economic diversity as well. I'm not sure that the San Francisco model is a great one or the right one for Albany. I see Albany as a place that was really developed physically for people who are starting out in life, and I'd like to find a way to make that possible too.
Okay, whole lot of thoughts, and I don't think I need to pontificate too much and on this. I've said a lot of things over the years. There's sort of a basic problem here of a bond measure like this distributes money based on population. So if you're the big city in the room, Oakland, you're going to get a lot more money and you can spend that on meaningful projects. If you're a very small city like Albany, we're going to get less. And in construction world, 2.6 million doesn't go very far. And an answer, thinking about Mayor McQuaid's question about the effects of the North Bay fires, I attended a party at Overall Construction, their 110th anniversary party on Saturday, and that was the #1 topic of discussion of all these contractors and architects, how the fires are going to warp building costs in the Bay Area for the next 10 years. It's just going to make it more difficult, not just for affordable housing, for any kind of housing, for any kind of project. But, that's what we're living with. So, we have to deal. I appreciate that the county has given us this, I think, an extra year to kind of work out what we can do with this money, because as I think is obvious, we don't have a lot of options in terms of places to put affordable housing projects that are usually considered what people want to see, big projects that can house a lot of people. The catchword up here tonight is creative. We're going to have to get very creative in terms of figuring out ways we can take this money and either subsidize some existing housing, buy an existing building. Perhaps there's other solutions. I think, I find it interesting that after this bond measure's passed, the supervisors are still kind of figuring out how this is going to work. And it gives me a little hope that they might be able to make it even more flexible for situations like ours. And I think if anyone wants to, talk to our local supervisor, Keith Carson, or to any of the supervisors, and stress that we need to have flexibility if we're going to do anything in Albany, that would be a good thing. So, again, ultimately, it may be because of our size and the amount of money we're getting that we're definitely going to have to partner with other cities, and perhaps whatever this money goes into may be in Berkeley or maybe in a surrounding community, and that's the most efficient way of using the funds. And, for me personally, that is a disappointment. I would prefer to see this used in Albany. I think everybody that voted for this measure agrees. But it's very challenging. And, hopefully we can all put on our creative hats and figure out alternatives that might work here.
Well, I just pretty much agreeing with what other people have said, and I think it's really time to make, and I think it's sort of the sense of the council, and certainly the sense of the public, that we do make a commitment that we're going to try really hard to create a project in Albany. It's not to say for sure we can do it, but I think we need to really try to do it. I think we need to work together with all of our creative brains But I also think it's time to kind of move this forward. And if that means hiring a consultant, I think that we need staff to look at the cost of that and bring that back to us. And I'm thinking, as I think Julie said, there are a lot of creative people that have a lot of ideas on this kind of thing. And I'd like to be able to sit down and really talk in a community setting of what ideas people have, what maybe if there's trades to be made, what other alternatives there are. Now, I'm not sure if that would just be a series of community meetings to really brainstorm, everything's on the table, let's see what we can come up with, or if we want to put together a short-term task force to really look at this. I don't really have a preference. Maybe Jeff or Penelope would have a preference on that. But I think those two things need to happen. I think we need to hire a consultant and really dive into this deeply. And I think we need to work more with the community groups and figure out what are ideas. That would be my sense of where we should be.
What would the consultant do? What would their brief be?
And Jeff, you can maybe help me with this. It seems like working on what might be available, what what funding sources might be, what things that you just don't have the bandwidth to do.
Right. I think you're absolutely right that it's a very complex part of the community development world, and having someone who has experience with developing projects would be very helpful. We can do the preliminary land use planning part of it and the community engagement part about different sites. It's having someone help either affirm that a particular site is feasible, or maybe that it's not feasible for development for affordable housing. I think that would be something where a consultant could be very helpful. And then if we go into looking at alternatives, if we're looking at 2 or 3 different alternatives, let's say we figure out something that might be able to work at Cleveland and Washington, we continue to work with Berkeley Food and Housing and Bridge, there's going to be a choice before you, and having someone with technical expertise that can help inform the council and the members of the public about that, that could be very helpful. Plus, of course, whatever, if council members have other things that you'd like to have an outside expert weigh in on, we could incorporate into the scope of work as well.
Well, what I'd like to see is sort of a developer recruitment process, someone who contacts the potential developers. They're the ones with the expertise. They're the ones who can tell us whether any particular site has potential, and also what the sources for funding would be, what the obstacles are, advantages and disadvantages. And they're not going to charge us. They're the developers. They're in this business. They're looking for opportunities. What we're looking for is someone to tell us whether there is an opportunity in Albany. And maybe we need a consultant to be the, to be the liaison between the city staff and the affordable housing development community. But I don't think that's they're not necessarily going to be the development experts. They're going to be people who know how to rally that energy to bring people in looking for opportunities. That would be my thought on it.
I think Councilmember Nason has some excellent points. I think that your call for recruitment, I believe it was the right one. In fact, I imagined that you were asking members of the Diverse Housing Working Group or not asking them, but suggesting that that could be one thing that they could do, is perhaps reach out to affordable housing developers, reach out to Susan Friedland, perhaps others in the know who know about this thing, know about these sorts of projects. And I think what we need to know is we need to reach out to these folks and have them tell us, oh, well, we can't do this in Albany because if only Albany would, and then give us things that perhaps we could change in our codes, that could make this more tenable for developers. I think that's exactly right. We could use more of that information about, a consultant could possibly reach out to developers, could examine our codes, examine our lots, and maybe suggest which projects make more sense for a small city, maybe building the units as part of a bigger project rather than a standalone project. I think a consultant could very well be well used in that regard.
Any other thoughts?
No, I'm
Does that give you some kind of direction?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, I guess with that, we're done with, excuse me.
Did I get my question answered?
Oh, could you answer his question? Thank you.
The bond measure is paid by
Right, that's- right.
property owners. I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact dollar amount per property owner.
Isn't it 12?
Again, it's probably 20 or 30. I don't remember exactly.
Jim, we're not going to do any more questions. Okay, so at that point, we will move on. You have what you need? Okay. Okay, the next item on our agenda is 10-1, Resolution 2017-71, approving updates to the City Council Rules of Procedure and Order and the City Council Administrative Policies. May we have a staff report? Or you could wiggle in there.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. This item is in follow-up to two previous discussions the council has had on this topic, and combining both statements by the mayor as well as council statements on pending legislation. This item was brought by Mayor McQuaid in July of this year as a legislative platform policy, which then the council agreed to create a subcommittee comprised of council members Nason and Moss to discuss the matter further and provide some updated language. What staff has tried to do with the two sets of policy draft language is blend those into the council's existing policy and procedure documents. You'll see those as attachments to your staff report this evening. The first one is the City Council Rules of Procedure and Order, and that's where we've included the statements by the mayor. You'll see it in red text there on page 12 of the attachment. And basically, it provides that statements may be issued by the mayor, similar to what you've had this evening. Those would be posted on the city's website, and basically there to help assure the public when we have ongoing concerns or issues raised in the community or really the nation at large. So that draft language is there for your review and edits as you see fit. Again, we're just trying to work these into existing documents that we have. The second amendment you'll see is in the City Council policy, administrative policy. And that adds a new policy which speaks more to the legislative matter, the pending legislation, and provides for those to be issued by the mayor if there's a significant time crunch and or through the usual process that we have here with the council, that they're put on the consent calendar and then also added to the city's website after approval. You'll find those changes on page 16 of the administrative policy. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions. Again, this is a proposed draft blending the two versions of these statements and policy language. So it can continue to be a working document until we get it right.
Are there any questions?
No questions, just comments.
Okay.
Same here.
Okay. Nobody, we drove them all out.
We've traumatized our audience.
I'll take any comments from staff or from council.
I can go first. I just have a couple of quick comments on page 12 under C2 Powers and Duties of Presiding Officer. By the way, I think this was generally very well done, and I'm in agreement with everything. Two things I would point out in statements by the mayor. In the case of an emergent crisis, I don't know that it has to be a crisis. I think that might be too strong a word. I might be, unfortunately, I don't know. I should have thought of wording ahead of time, but maybe significant event or a serious event or something maybe serious, denoting the seriousness, but a little bit short of a crisis, I think would be a better word there, because it may not be a crisis. I don't think that for example, the hate crime is necessarily a crisis, but it's a very serious, significant event. And then further down in that paragraph, the mayor may prepare and issue a statement which will be read at the next scheduled city council meeting. So clarification, I would prefer that the mayor be allowed to read that upon the event occurring or soon after the event occurring, and not having to wait until the next scheduled city council meeting to have that read. I don't know if that's the intent of this or not. If the intent is to hold that until the next city council meeting, I think the danger is that the public doesn't know of our rules and procedures of order. And if there's something serious and significant that happens that the mayor should address and reassure the public about, the public is not going to understand that we have these.
I think that I think it does mean that, though, because it has the mayor issuing the statement and then will be read.
Also read.
So
and maybe if we could just put the word "also" in, that would reassure me.
Or possibly
of the
issuing
intent.
in the upcoming newsletter or on the city's website or whatever means we might have at our fingertips.
And that's what you'll see for what happened this evening. The mayor, the statement by the mayor was included in the e-newsletter last Friday.
That's true. Okay, great.
And posted to the website.
As long as people understand that that's the intent, and maybe putting the word in "also" there would help make that crystal clear. That's it for me.
Rochelle?
Yeah, I agree with that. That perhaps something other than crisis wording should be used. Perhaps an emergent matter of significant concern to the Albany community, or something along those lines. That it doesn't have to be a crisis for the mayor to speak. And on the other hand, there's some crisis somewhere in the world every week. So you could have a statement on a lot of things, but something like, for example, a swastika being painted, swastika graffiti being put up in a hallway, it's not really a crisis, but it is something of significant concern that does, I think, warrant a statement from the mayor saying, we really have a concern about this as a community, and we're going to step up to try to prevent this kind of thing from happening. On the legislation, I thought about, I'd like to be sure that we don't, at the end of a legislative session, we start getting requests from, say, the League of California Cities or something saying, we need a letter on this, we need a letter on that, we need a letter on the other thing. I'd like us not to do those in a hurry, clumped up at the end of the legislative session. And the reason is, and I've worked the legislature, I've worked as an advocate there. Sometimes the things that are going on in the legislature at the end of session are very complex, and that people are arguing over details. And they ask you, and I think about, like, we talked about Senate Bill 1, where, which was basically the vehicle taxes that were increased. And we were asked by the League of California Cities to submit a letter at a time when the environmental community was trying to make the legislation more friendly to environmental justice. They were trying to get environmental justice changes. So it would just be, I'd like to add some language. We say if an urgent request is received, too late for timely council consideration, that I'd like that to say, if an urgent request is received that could not have been addressed in a timely manner, as an additional phrase before we say too late for timely council consideration, so that we're not responding to advocacy requests that could have been thought through and the city taken a position, and that we're just responding in a less thoughtful way at the end of the session, if that makes sense.
And part of the problem is it doesn't only relate to end of the session.
Yes, but any request that is made, that the advocates could have asked us to take a policy position, and we had a chance to do it, we could have done it, but they're asking us at the very last minute because they're trying to build up pressure on something that we may not even understand. That's my concern. So it would apply, it wouldn't only be at the end of session, it would be any time. If we're asked, if we get an urgent request, the first question is this a true emergency? Is this really urgent? Or is this just something that an advocacy group is seeking at the last minute for advocacy purposes, as opposed to a policy decision that we need to make and that we could make in a timely way? So I would just add in there, if an urgent request, if an urgent request that that could not have been considered in the ordinary course of business, in the ordinary course of council business. If an urgent request is made that is received that could not have been considered in the ordinary course of council business. So we're only taking these, we're only acting on urgent requests if they are things that we really could not have taken up early in a timely fashion.
So I'm not opposed to that, I'm just trying to think it through a little bit. I think August, because we're dark for the whole month of August. So if we got something in the middle of August, I'm not sure how they could have done it sooner, or how does that fit into your piece? I'm not sure.
Well, bills are not introduced in the middle of August. They do change dramatically. They can change dramatically up to, to the end of the session. But if somebody's coming to us and saying, it's August 28th, and we want you to submit a letter in support of such and such legislation, and this is legislation that has been pending for months, I would not want to do it on an urgency basis unless there is a really core city value at stake. If it's just some general state policy matter, I don't think that we should be making urgent decisions on big policy matters at a time when the council isn't meeting if we could have taken it up before. It puts the responsibility on us as a council to figure out what are the things we want the council to take positions on, and we bring them forward, and we do it in a timely way. And it's not something that the mayor does on their own at the end of the session.
Can you tell me where you are?
I'm in the administrative policies draft update. page 16,
Okay, thank you.
third paragraph under procedure.
I think, is it page 17?
Yeah.
It says 16 on what I'm looking at. Mine
I
says
think it is
16
17
of
on the hard
17.
copy, and that's okay, hang on.
Okay. Here's what-
Oh, that's interesting. It's 17.
Okay, so,
Oh, that's
so it's,
Nick and I are looking at different documents.
Yeah, let's see.
So I opened Granicus and it's on page 16.
well, I couldn't get Granicus to open, so we're all in good shape.
I'm on Granicus, and it's 16. He's looking at a red line.
It's the same document. I think that
Oh, if it's
perhaps your
redlined,
Granicus
it's
did an update.
Okay.
It's the exact same text. It's one is underlined and one is just red
Okay.
text.
I just, okay, yeah, I just reloaded the page, and now I have a different document,
Yeah.
which is on page 16. Yeah.
So the general principle is that as council members, if we want the city council to take a position on an issue, we bring it forward in a timely way. And the mayor is not making those decisions on their own at the end of the session. We bring them in at a time when everyone can read them and consider them. And the only things that happen on an urgency basis are those really unexpected, crazy things.
So could you say, I'm sorry, one more time what your change is now that I've found where you are?
Let's see, if an urgent request is received that could not have been handled in the regular course of council business, I don't think handled is the right word, that could not have been
You had
considered
Considered in
in the ordinary
course
course of council business, yeah. But if they come forward and say, we want a letter on this, and the bill is the same as it's been for months, I don't think that we should submit a letter under those circumstances without the council being able to consider it.
Sometimes requests are urgent because the legislation might not have changed, but the vote count is such that it's at a tipping point, and if it's of enough concern to us, it might need our support to tip the votes over, or it might be the case we need, then the legislation passes to the governor, and he's deciding whether to veto it or not, or whether to sign it or not, and it's the same legislation, but, so I assume that you're in those cases, it is still an urgent request in your mind?
Well, to my mind, the tipping point, no, that wouldn't be an urgent request. If you have a bill and it's been the same for 6 months, and you come to the end of session and it's a very close vote, and advocates are asking for letters because it's a close vote, but nobody on the council thought it was important enough to bring forward to take a position on during the 6 months when it was pending, then it isn't something we should do at the end of session. On the other hand, when it's on the governor's desk, and the question is, do we send a message to the governor? We'll usually have time to make a decision as a council, but if we don't, then we look to whether we have a position or not. If we opposed the legislation, we can send a letter saying, please don't sign it. If we supported it, we can put in a letter saying, please sign this.
I think that's what we've done in the past. If we've already sent the letter, we just follow that pattern.
Yes.
You know.
Yes.
I think, to me, where this comes down even more is on a Tuesday, say we meet on a Monday night, on Tuesday we get an email from somebody, either from the League of California Cities or it could be another group, that there's a bill pending and the hearing is on Friday. Well, we don't meet until 2 weeks down the road, so we don't have an opportunity to weigh in. That's, I think, more where we would send a letter, although it's past our deadline to get it on the council agenda.
That would be a case where it would be very legitimate to send a letter. But
And
that's
that's-
not a case where the bill has been pending for months.
And I don't think I ever really thought about the bill pending for months. I'm always thinking more about, we just missed the deadline and now we can't get something on our agenda for another 2 weeks. That was, I think, more my thought about this.
Would that language be problematical, do you think? That could not otherwise have been?
No, I don't think it's problematical. I just think you're looking at it a little differently than I did, as to the timing of what these letters would be for. It's not necessarily the end of session. It could be any time. And it's not always legislative. It could be other things.
True, and it could be administrative decisions, whatever it would be. The central idea is we try to see that council members bring forward the things that they want us to take positions on in a timely way so they can be considered and a position taken, and not done in a hurry at a time when not unnecessarily be done in a hurry at a time when the council doesn't have a chance to meet.
And putting that in there would still work on having to do it quickly sometimes.
That's what I'm trying to achieve.
Right, okay.
I ask for a clarification. Adding the language that Councilmember Nason just mentioned, would you then want to strike what's after the comma there, which currently reads "too late for timely council consideration"?
No, that would stay. That would stay, yeah.
So after consideration, you put "or that could not have been considered." Is that how that reads then?
Let's see. If an urgent request is received that could not have been considered in the ordinary course of council business, comma, too late for timely council consideration, that the city take a position on a piece of legislation. It's just adding a parenthetical there.
Okay.
Not a parenthetical, a clause, comma.
Okay. I don't think it's necessary, but I'm happy to have it in there if that makes people happier.
Thank you.
Is there other discussion? Okay, so we're ready to vote? Okay, can you poll the council with the change?
Motion?
Oh. Can somebody make a motion, please? Sorry, thank you.
I'll move the updated City Council administrative policies and City Council rules of procedure in order as amended by discussion at council.
Second.
I'll second it.
Councilmember Barnes?
I'm going to abstain.
Councilmember Moss?
Yay.
Councilmember Nason?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Pilch?
Yes.
Mayor McQuaid?
Yes, and the motion carries. Okay, there's no new business. The next city council meeting will be on Monday, November 6th. There will be a community meeting from 5:45 to 7:15 to discuss potential uses for the sugar sweetened beverage tax. We are adjourning in memory of those killed in the North Bay fires.
We're going to do other business and future agenda items.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Yes, you have other business, I'm sorry.
I do have a couple of future agenda items today. One is I would like us to consider an amendment to our rules of procedure that would permit people to make comments by email on matters that are before the council and have their email address redacted from the version that is publicly distributed. I think that it's potentially chilling, has a chilling effect on people's willingness to submit comments if they have to publicly expose the email address from which they're sending it.
Okay.
And the other is a longer-term issue, and that is I would like to see the council take up the possibility, perhaps at its next organization of committees, of creating a type of finance committee that a number of small cities have, in which they have not a subcommittee of the council, but they have a subcommittee of the council serve on the finance committee, which is also has people who are from the community who have expertise either in the work of the city or in financial, or they have financial expertise, to look at long-term financial issues for that the council, the long-term impacts of decisions that the council needs to make. So if we have issues like what percentage funding of the pensions is appropriate, that we would have a committee that could take the time and look at that with care and recommend policies that could remain consistent over time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else from anybody? Okay.
We should let the public know we have an owl.
Oh, right, we have an owl.
Someone has found affordable housing in Albany. A burrowing owl has taken up residence at the burrowing owl habitat, and we're
I'm
all
not sure that's
very happy
affordable.
about that.
That cost
Well,
us a
yeah.
lot of money.
Yeah.
Okay, on a more serious note, we are adjourning in memory of those killed in the North Bay fires. Let us pause a moment to remember them, as well as those who were injured and those who lost so much. And with that, we are adjourned.